Hello and welcome back to another episode of Only a Bag, a travel podcast. I am your host, Nathaniel Mellor.
And I'm your host, Darcy Melton. And we're going to be talking about coffee culture, and drinks in Rome.
Yes, we are. So to get us started, we thought maybe starting with coffee, starting with bars, starting with, a recommendation is if you are going to go to Italy or to Rome specifically is to enjoy a coffee, have a coffee, enjoy the culture, which is very different from American culture, and to sort of get the full experience.
Yeah, I mean, if you don't drink coffee, they also have tea and stuff like that. But coffee is a big part of life in Italy. It's the first thing that starts your day. And for a lot of people, it's the thing that kind of ends your night as well.
It is. And if you don't drink coffee, by the way, there are a number of people here who don't, surprisingly. And you can order an orzo, O-R-Z-O. And that is a barley. It just means barley, but it's like a toasted barley sort of drink, or a ginseng. And they're both supposed to be like a coffee substitute. They won't have caffeine or anything like that, but they just they act like a coffee substitute. And they're usually ever so slightly more expensive. So maybe 80 cents for a coffee, €1 for a barley or a ginseng.
They also have tea, which is,
Yes.
so tè is just regular tea, like a black tea, and tisana is like an herbal tea. So like anywhere else, they have hot teas too.
And to order either your tea or your coffee, it's typically done in a bar, which is just what the expression, the word is bar, but it really, what's what we would call a cafe in America.
Yeah, exactly.
But it's where you would order you go in the morning to have a pastry, you have your coffee, your tea.
Yeah, and so what you do here is you typically walk up to the bar, it's a bar, literally, the little banquette. You order your cafe, whatever it is, and you can drink it at the bar or take it to a table. But typically, I don't know, in the US, I guess we go to the counter, order a coffee, pick it up, go sit at a table. But here, if you want to sit at a table, you can just sit down. Someone will come ask your order, or you can just go to the bar and have it there.
Or you can go to the bar and order and then sit down and someone will bring it over.
Yeah.
Depending if you are in the mood for, actually that's a good segue. And what's something to first talk about is is basically the especially without coronavirus, especially without COVID, but right before COVID and for the last 60 years, the sort of the culture in a bar is a little bit very lively. It can be very lively. It can be really almost aggressive sometimes. It can feel, maybe it isn't actually aggressive, but it can certainly
feel that way for someone on the outside, maybe.
Yeah, and someone who is Darcy's a little bit shorter, and then
I'm 5'4", just for reference.
What I mean that in the sense of sometimes, which actually in Italy is very average height, but she is sort of neck and neck with a lot of other people who are standing at a bar, so it can kind of be very claustrophobic.
Yeah.
And it can kind of, especially again, depending which bar you go to, airports and train stations and even like bus stations are sort of notorious for being, everybody's just there to have a coffee and leave, so it's not a very relaxed atmosphere. It's very people kind of shoving their way to the front to get their order in, to get their coffee made, to leave, because coffee here can really be a 30-second, 45-second start to finish from when you order to when you get your coffee. It can really take no longer.
I mean, and then some people drink them in like just a shot, like they just toss it back. I don't know how. I can't do that yet. They come to you scalding, and then some people will just like knock it back. You're done.
Yeah.
Oof, man, I can't do that yet.
It's interesting because some people also will do a packet of sugar. Some people do 2 packets of sugar, and we're only talking about an ounce, maybe 2 ounces of coffee if the person who's pulling it pulls it long. But usually it's only an ounce of coffee, so it's not very much liquid. And then they put a sugar packet or 2 in there and stir it, so it becomes like a syrup, and they sort of just toss it back. But it is so kind of like walking through. We wanted to kind of walk you through the process in case you were going to go to a bar and have a drink. We wanted to kind of prime you a little bit because we did have the privilege of being able to go to bars with Italians who were able to tell us how to do things. Sometimes
Right.
we don't get that privilege of going to, like, in a new country. Sometimes we don't have friends, so we have to sort of work it out by ourselves, which is really exciting.
Yeah.
But it's nice here to kind of have that, like, the culture. So we figured we kind of start at the beginning, which is simply going inside. And usually and we're going to use that word typically, by the way, a lot. I want to go ahead and apologize to anybody who really does not like the word, in case there are people who don't like the word typically. But this whole episode is going to be us saying typically, because there are so many things that are done in one place that are not done in another place, or the way that things should be done but are only done, again, like in theory. They're not actually done in practice. So you might walk into a bar and either one of two things. You either go and order your drink, have your drink, and then pay, or you will pay, get a little receipt, bring that to the bar. They'll read the receipt, tear it a little bit, like tear it halfway through, and then make your drink for you. In more touristy places, especially in Rome, that's more common, is to pay first and then to get your drink afterwards.
However, I think you and I aren't used to that, and we would often just walk up to the bar, and no one was ever angry with us or anything. It's not like they're going to be like, you need a ticket first, but just maybe be aware, see what other people are doing, and try to be as polite as possible.
Yeah, the only place I think we ever had a weird, like, oh, whoops, like, not we were, even yelled at or anything. It was just simply very briskly told to go pay first, was actually at the airport in Naples, I believe, or Napoli, where we went to go get a little piece of pizza and a little, I think we just were going to get like pizza each or something like that. And the guy like pointed towards really vigorously pointed towards the cash register. And we're like, oh, like, do we pay first? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, we're in Naples, and I don't think anywhere else in Naples do you pay first. Which, again, if you know any like Italian, it helps a lot, because I think if you respond in Italian or ask an Italian for coffee, it helps a lot, just because people are like, oh, they act, okay, they might be Italian, or maybe they have family here, so that's, you'll treat it a little bit, not better necessarily, but more like you're not going to walk out on the bill. I think sometimes in Rome, we've been to cafes and things like that it feels like some people have clearly paid and left without actually, ordered and left without actually paying. So they have, like, even that, we had drinks that one of my family, we were visiting my family in Rome.
Oh, that was weird, yeah.
And they sort of, like, as soon as they brought the drinks to the table, they made us pay. And we were all kind of like, and half of us were Italian, like actually Italian, not just me, who's like, reclaimed my Italian citizenship, but like born and raised in Rome. And they were just like, what do you mean pay for, like, pay?
Yeah, I think you're like anywhere, some people have misgivings about people they perceive to be tourists. And I mean, a lot of people, obviously, if you make a little bit of an effort to try your best to say things in the language of wherever you're visiting, so Italian for Rome, people really appreciate it, even if it's completely garbled and incorrect and you have to switch back to English. People really appreciate the try.
100, yeah, no, I think that's what we've noticed. Or they're very good to correct you. I mean, we've noticed that Italian culture is, at least in the middle of the country, in the south of the country, it's very typical that you'd be corrected if you try to speak Italian. I mean, I was asking for the key to the bathroom once, and I think I asked for the church, and then she sort of very like briskly corrected me, and then like made me ask the question again to get the key. And even now I'm like, oh my god, I can't even remember the word for key in church. It's chiesa is church, and chiave,
you got it.
Chiave is key. And I just sort of like, I mixed the two up, and she was like, ask again, but know that the word is chiave. And I was like, okay. So there are people who are genuinely very helpful. They want you to they're happy to help you learn if you are interested in learning some words.
And on the note of people being helpful, but sometimes brisk, something that I experienced whenever we first came here was going to a bar, wanting a coffee, and seeing like a group of 10 people around. And I may have said this before in the podcast, but to our experience, Italians don't really line up or make a queue. They just kind of make a blob, and everybody remembers sort of who was there first, or they'll ask like, oh, which order are we in? So just be prepared for that. It still throws me off. So if you go into a bar and there are lots of people there, try to catch the eye of the bartender, but they're quite good at realizing who is next in the group. So, I don't know. I just suggest try to be as nice as possible. It's kind of anxiety inducing sometimes when there's a large group, but the people who work there will know what's going on, and we'll get to you, And
there's always the people that try to sort of cut the line, obviously, always for everything. We've been cut in line to get on a bus once, which was kind of ridiculous, because I'm like, we all had tickets and seats, and it was just like, you want to get on the bus first? We're going to be on it for 5 hours. You might as well. It was very strange, but there will always be people who are going to try to cut in line, just because I feel like it's a very, it's sort of a generalized, but a generalization, but it's a very Italian thing to do, is sort of like cut in line, I feel like.
I think it's a human thing to do.
Well, I meant like you get shot for that in England, I feel like, So, They don't even own guns, and you get shot for that in England.
In more rule-following countries, yeah, it doesn't happen as much.
Or some stern looks at the very least. But here it's just more like, what are you going to do?
I'm imagining a group of Italians trying to make a clump and Germans really putting them into shape, making them form a singular line.
Yeah, it's also just, I mean, okay, we're off topic now, but if you're going to form a line anywhere in a grocery store, for example, even despite the fact COVID is happening, it's a very strange way to form a line, but you basically have to be touching the person in front of you if you're in line. Because of COVID, you're supposed to put like, a meter between you and the person in front of you. And we've done that. And without fail, people will step between us and then the person in front of us. And it's not like we might be in line, might not be in line. We're certainly in line, whether it's at a post office or the grocery store, wherever we are. And we're clearly in line and there's nothing else around that we could be doing. Somebody will step in front of us. And then we're kind of looking at them and they look back and like, oh, were you in line waiting? And I was like, yeah, because it's coronavirus and we're supposed to be giving people a meter. And there's signs everywhere around the post office or whatever it is to give people a meter. But that's still slow going. That's like, so if you do happen to get cut in line, it's not because somebody's like, oh, these, tourists. It's more just like what we've chalked it up to is people simply not realizing that we're in line. They're just like, oh, well, they're clearly not in line. They're, about a meter away, a yard away from the person in front of them. They must be doing something else. They must be on their phone.
It's just a cultural difference.
Yeah. So that's a little off topic. I apologize. No. So for ordering coffee, you go in, you either pay or you just go to the bar, like Darcy mentioned. It might be a madhouse depending where you are, but you essentially just go up and you order your coffee. There are, like I guess in any other coffee culture, there's different drinks obviously you can order. The main one you'll see almost everybody drinking, we call an espresso, but here it's just like everywhere in Italy. Unless it's maybe not, but almost everywhere we've ever been, it's just cafe or cafe normale, which is a normal coffee. Mm-hmm. So that's when you ask, let's just say in English, you ask for, I just want a normal coffee, because some people who do speak English and who are American do ask for a normal coffee, please, and they get an espresso and they say that's not normal, and it really quite literally is a normal coffee here. So if the cafe normale is just what we would call an espresso, then there's macchiato,
which literally means marked. So cafe macchiato is a shot of espresso marked with milk, fluffy, foamy milk.
And that could be this. I worked in a coffee shop for a little bit. It was a restaurant/coffee shop, and they were very serious about their their espresso should be 1 ounce of coffee, and a double espresso is 2 ounces, and a macchiato is 2 ounces of coffee and 2 ounces of milk, and they had the very specific measurements done. And that, for sure happens in some places here that serve coffee, but we've gotten like sometimes the macchiato will be steamed milk, like just hot milk mixed in with coffee, no foam on top. Sometimes it's just foam on top of coffee. Sometimes a little bit of both. It really depends who makes it. It really depends where you get it. We've had 3 different macchiatos from the same place just because 3 different people made it. But then there's cappuccino.
Yeah, a cappuccino, which is lovely. Which is a shot of espresso and then a bunch of fluffy milk. Yeah,
fluffy milk, steamed milk. And then there's a latte, which is less ordered. I feel like we don't...
Yeah, it's less common here. I think a latte in the U.S. is really popular. I don't know if ours really are lattes, though. But here it's a little bit of coffee, like a shot of espresso, and then even more milk than the cappuccino, just to put it simply.
Yeah. It's mostly milk with a little bit of coffee in there for flavor. You'll see them oftentimes we've noticed a lot of older men order it to dip their little
cookies,
little cookies in.
Biscuits. Oh, it's very cute.
So it's not a that one's a little bit more of a sit and drink sort of thing. But like Darcy was saying, we were saying earlier, is that a lot of times if you just go for the straight coffee, if you go to the bar, order the coffee and stand there, they don't really expect you to be there for more than a minute.
Yeah, you and I sometimes will hang out when we know that there aren't other people waiting, but to stand at the bar really is like you'll be here for a minute to 5 minutes, not a lingering hour-long conversation kind of deal.
Yeah, you can absolutely sit down if that's what you want, and no one will bother you. You sit down with the coffee, that's basically your table until you leave. No one asks you to get it for lunch. No one asks you, it's nice too, especially if you happen to be there are places that are basically a cafe in the morning and a restaurant at night. They serve just coffee in the morning, or pastries and coffee in the morning.
That was more common in Rome. I mean, we live in the South, so that's not really a thing here. But in Rome, that was common. So we had to be a little conscientious about what time we were there.
Yeah, especially if we woke up late and we just had a late night or whatever it is, and we get to the cafe at like 11 instead of 10 or instead of 9 or instead of 8:30. And we start to see like, oh, people here are moving on from coffee and they're starting to get like Campari soda, or they're starting to get pizzas. That you have to kind of be aware. And especially after lunch, it's like you might stop in for an after lunch coffee, but then you're like, oh, people are starting to order real food. We need to get out before, like, not that they'll kick you out, but it's just to be nice. It's just not to take up a table, especially during COVID, where they are almost all tables are reduced by half, if not more, depending where you are. So we don't want to basically be taking up a table just to have the dregs of a coffee.
Yeah, and thinking about that, if you go to a normal bar or cafe, there usually isn't a sitting fee, right? We haven't really experienced a sitting fee at a typical bar. However, we did go to Capri and we're charged like €12 for
each
for I think like a cappuccino,
yeah.
because there was a massive sitting fee. We didn't really experience that in Rome, but we didn't have coffees at that many tourist places. Oh, there's a great coffee place near the Pantheon. They do have a sitting fee.
Yes,
and they will be very clear about it. They will not let you sit down inside or outside if you don't pay.
Which is, if I may interrupt real quickly, I don't mind that. We both are very happy if you have a clear sitting fee. If you're like, because we actually sat down and like, oh, you can't sit here unfortunately unless you ordered the. It's a coffee shop that's famous for its a cafe granita, which is just like sort of an iced coffee slushy with cream, and then more iced coffee slushy and cream. It's a very famous one. But they will basically just be like, oh, you have to pay for the one to sit outside with it, which is kind of a waste of money because literally 12 steps away, you can sit at the steps and look up at the Pantheon. So it's kind
for free.
Yeah, for free. So it's not a great use of money to sit there. But we're totally fine if if you're very clear from the outset. But this one was like, we went inside, we were standing at the bar, and they kept like pushing us outside and ushering us outside. And we're like, oh, maybe you're never supposed to sit at the bar here. Okay. So we sat and we had a coffee, and then we went inside, and they're like, it's something like €24, and we're like, for 2 coffees, it's 24 for 2 coffees. And they showed us the thing, and it was like, if you sit down, it's €12 each. If you stand, it was like €1.50. And we're like, so we got really annoyed because like we tried to stand, we assumed we weren't allowed to stand, and now you're charging us for.
Yeah, that was in Capri though. They have a very different. I mean, obviously, it's not the same culture as Rome. It's a completely different place.
Yeah.
But they also have a very different tourist culture, aside from their regular people culture.
Yeah.
So it was just a completely different thing.
So I think in Rome you will be safe by and large because they are, from what we saw, very clear with prices. And that's something that, you believe it or not, is not common. In Italy, you might. There's a standard price for coffee depending where you are, but it's anywhere between 80 cents and €1. So if you get a coffee pretty much anywhere in Italy, you'll probably spend somewhere between 80 cents for the espresso, up to €1 for the espresso. And it really changes depending on what you order, obviously, and where you are, but that's the base rate. Sometimes it's less than that. Sometimes it's 60 or 70 cents. Sometimes it's more. Sometimes it's much more. But even in Rome, we've been to places, even in the same, a couple of times in the same cafe, where one person would charge us 80 cents and one would charge us €1. And we could never figure out if it was just one person had a different understanding of the pricing system, or because it was a small cafe. It wasn't like, it wasn't one of those kind of bigger ones with very set prices. It was kind of just like a tiny little run store.
I mean, a lot of cafes here have a very family run sort
dynamic.
of. Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard to, sometimes it might, and also it's like maybe we run at a different time, or maybe it was just sort of like a.
Who knows?
Exactly. So if you're getting charged 2 different things, my personal recommendation with anytime we're overcharged and or undercharged is not to worry about it. It's almost never, and I mean, I would probably say never, but there's probably one case of it, but it's almost never malicious. It's always just, maybe it was the younger person who made the coffees in the morning who charged you €1 trying to be, very strict to what they charge, or it could have been the older person in the morning who owns the cafe maybe, who wants to charge €1 because that's their price, but the younger person's like, no, we're just going to charge 80 cents. Could be the older person's like, oh my God, tourists, I love tourists. I'll charge you 80 cents for coffee. No worries. You get the, the discounted price. So it really can differ. Your mileage may vary, basically. Yeah. But no, once you order your coffee, again, just to wind that up, you can sit down with it, or you can take it at the bar. Again, if you sit down, it's your table for the day. If you take it at the bar, Yeah, you probably won't be there for longer than, a couple minutes tops.
And on the note of taking time, I think we should talk about what some people eat with their coffee in the morning.
Yeah.
So typically, a lot of people will have a cornetto, which is, I hate to say it this way, but it's like the Italian croissant.
Yeah. Same shape.
Same shape, different flavor, usually. Well, a cornetto is different. Sometimes you will find a croissant here. I'm not going to attempt to say that in a French accent.
Croissant.
Sometimes you will find a croissant, which is made with butter and tastes very French. The cornetti have more of a, almost like an orangey essence, and are more sugary. And so a lot of people will have those with their coffee. Nathaniel's favorite is a sfogliatella, which is Napolitano. But it's like this little clamshell looking crispy thing with ricotta and
It's like lemon and orange rind basically inside. Yeah. It's a little bit more, I like to think it's healthier. It's not, but because it has cheese inside, I'm like, oh, it's a nice heavy.
Got some protein in there for the morning. But typically people will have a cornetto. And here is one of my favorite things about cafe culture. Many of the bars, if you order a cornetto and a cafe, they will make sure that you eat your cornetto. Like they'll watch you, not creepily, but they'll kind of make sure that you're done with that before they start making your coffee, because the coffee is to digest your breakfast essentially. So you can't have your digestive before you have your breakfast. That makes no sense. Some people will give it to you at the same time. I mean, especially if they realize that you're not Italian. But that's my favorite thing.
Older people, generally speaking, will not.
Yes. Even if you ask, they're like, no, you can't do that.
Or
that's not good for you.
Or they'll even act like it's like your idea that they're not giving it to them. Like, you know what? No, maybe you should just have the cornetto first, and then I'll give you the coffee. Just as a little heads up, if you're like, I want to dip my cornetto into the coffee, no one might allow that. You might not be able to do that.
Yeah, it's quite cute.
So you have to just keep that in mind. But no, you can definitely, those are just two of.
Oh yeah, there's a bunch
of
pastries.
Wide assortment of pastries. And again, sometimes they will, going back to the cornetto versus croissant, I am going to butcher two languages, if that's okay. There are definitely cafes that serve a French croissant and then a Italian cornetto. For people who prefer one or the other, because unfortunately the cornetto, with almost all Italian pastries, they all come dusted with powdered sugar, which is just kind of a pain, to be honest. And then the cornetto have sometimes this like syrup, not even syrup, it's like glazed sugar on top, like clear glazed sugar on top, and then the powdered sugar sticks to that, so it can be really difficult to get the powdered sugar off. And even you mentioned that orange flavor, it's not a real orange. It's not like they mixed.
Sometimes it's a lovely real orange. Sometimes it is not.
Yeah, and you can definitely tell the difference. It's like, oh, that just tastes like, artificial flavoring.
And by and large, Italian breakfast, I think we've mentioned this before, but Italian breakfast is quite sugary.
Yes. It's also not a thing, though, Italian breakfast. That is, I mean, even at home, people might have a piece of bread with like jam and they'll go out for coffee, especially if they've already had a coffee, they'll go out for coffee. But Italians don't really do a breakfast, we've noticed, anywhere. Like no one, I mean, apart
very
from
few people, at least where we've been.
Apart from a pastry or something like that, it's not like, I mean, even French people have slightly more of a breakfast, I think, but like it's not like English people or American people who are like, you go there for, I want to get the American breakfast when we're there.
Yeah, absolutely. Not
so
fitting here.
A little bit different.
And on that note, I find it interesting too that breakfast, mid-morning, lunch, afternoon, dinner, like the whole day is marked by coffees, really. So you might have a coffee before you leave the house, and then you might have a coffee at a bar when you go out, right, in the morning. And then at like 10 a.m., you have another coffee break, maybe at work. Maybe we often see a bunch of people from like an office come out to the local bar, have a coffee, all go back to work. Then after lunch, you'll have a coffee to digest your lunch. And then in the afternoon, you'll have like a little coffee.
Maybe a snack sometimes.
And maybe a snack to like a little pick-me-up in the afternoon.
Like 4 usually.
Yeah, and then
after
dinner, you'll have a little coffee potentially after you eat to, again, digest your food.
Yeah, there's a lot of coffee happening. A lot of coffee throughout the day. I don't know how any of these people have survived.
Yeah, or sleep at night. My goodness.
They must have no problems, I guess, with caffeine. But no, there are definitely minimum of 4 times during the day where coffees are sort of an expected event. Unfortunately, it's like, I mean, without getting too off topic, it plays into all sorts of food things. Like a lot of Italians won't get a gelato if they just had a coffee. Like it's like, no, I just had a coffee.
You have to have the gelato before the coffee.
Yeah, so it's like if you have an Italian friend and they just had a coffee, they're almost certainly not going to eat anything for another hour or two. They're like, I just had a coffee. So it's kind of a little bit like, oh, is that a thing? Okay.
It is in Italy, Nathaniel.
It is in Italy. But there's also all these sorts of, if you ever sit in a cafe, you'll observe some of them yourself, but there's some interesting rules just around if you're at a cafe and you're having a coffee, or a bar and you're having a coffee and you have a friend that comes in, you're buying them a coffee. That's just that's just how it works. Even if you don't sit and talk to them for more than, hey, how you doing? But especially in the South, even in Perugia, which isn't the South, it's north past Rome, and it's a city more than just a tiny town, but it's the same thing where, one person might be in a cafe and all of a sudden 3 or 4 other, people they happen to know, whether from work or whether from this, whether from that, and they'll pay 4 or 5 euros for everybody to have a coffee. And it's one of those things that's like, from our understanding, it eventually sort of works out. Like, we've known people who go like 3 weeks without ever having to pay for a coffee because they're just always happen to be there after somebody they know. But then vice versa. Then they spend a whole month just paying for people's coffees. Yeah. So it works out in the end. But there's some interesting customs and culture around how the coffee works, when you're supposed to give it to somebody, how, and if sometimes, by the way, if somebody has offered you coffee or will, if you, for instance, meet somebody somewhere and then the next morning you see them in a cafe and they're like, let me buy you a coffee. I would recommend just saying yes. It's especially if they're Italian, it's just the custom to, you don't have to, they don't expect conversation necessarily. They don't expect anything like that. They're just buying you a coffee. Yeah. We've had that a couple of times happen where we're, we just walk in and people are like, oh, hey, what's up? Let me get your coffee. All right, I'll see you guys later. And then we're like, okay, goodbye. So it's going to be a little bit strange. And Darcy was mentioning earlier about having, coffee in the early morning, not early morning, like 10, later morning. But sometimes you might go in for coffee, a late coffee, and you'll see people already drinking. They'll have a beer, or they'll have a little red liquid Campari and soda, or Aperol Spritz, or just an Aperol. And that is basically the start of the lunchtime aperitivo. And it's really kind of when it seems like, without having actually worked in Italy, it seems like basically when work is winding down, or maybe there's hit a break. So they all go out and have a beer or a Campari soda, Aperol Spritz. Mm-hmm. There's always some snacks involved, usually given for free by the bar. And that can be anything from, little taralli, which are like little crackers, to basically slices of like tiny little squares of pizza, to whatever it is. And that lasts for anywhere from like 10 minutes to 45 minutes or an hour, depending where you are. And
Usually the aperitivo before dinner is longer than the aperitivo before lunch. Before lunch is usually a quick beer, chit-chat, get back to lunch, and then get back to work.
Get back to lunch.
Get to lunch. Get to lunch
get back
the first time.
But no, that's exactly it. It's like, and then they go to lunch, and then they, and then that lunch can, and so like Darcy's mentioning also how like having a coffee at 4 and then going back to work, it's because here people do typically work to about 8:30 at night. In case you're, just if you see people at work, it's because workday starts around 8:39, and then ends about 8:30, 9 o'clock at night,
with a pretty long lunch in between and a couple coffee breaks, things like that.
Yeah, so it's not throughout. There is about depending where you are. Again, really, it's like that, using that word typically again, but it's a 3-hour lunch. It's usually 1:30 to 4:30, or 1 to 4, and in this time. In Rome even, and that's like obviously pretty much the biggest or one of the biggest cities in Italy, apart from Milan maybe, that's going to be the time where things are closed, especially if you go anywhere outside of Rome. Pretty much count on nothing being open between 1:30 and 4:30. So if you need to go grocery shopping, maybe one of the bigger grocery stores will be open, but the smaller ones probably will not be.
Yeah.
Certain grocery store chains are closed during lunch. So there's one called Todis, which is like it's a discount supermarket, which are really big in Europe. I've never actually seen one in America.
Nope.
But if you actually, we'll mention that later, but it's a supermarket chain. And they're always closed between 1:30 and 4:30. A lot of...
basically shops. Just count on shops being closed. Sometimes bars, sometimes restaurants will still be open, but you probably need to get whatever you need before 1:30 or after 4:30. And then usually, especially Well, I say especially in small towns, but right now we're living in a pretty noisy little town. But sometimes people will be pretty respectful during that lunch hour. And if we go outside, we tend to kind of speak in lowered voices, not super jovially necessarily, because it's also the nap time. So people have lunch, they have a little pizzolino, a little nap, and then they get back to work.
And it's unfortunate. Sometimes they don't even get to nap. They just a lot of people come, because that's when kids get off of school, I think around 1, I believe, here in Italy, like around 1. So the parents have to come home, they have to make lunch, the kids are there. It's just like, for a lot of parents, it's not a restful time. It's oh my God, I have to go running around and doing all these things. But for a lot of people who are not parents or who have kids who no longer live at their house, it's just like having a long lunch at a restaurant, going home, taking a nap, and going back to work, which, then they have to work for another only 4 or 5 hours after that, only. But no, that's definitely a huge part. And then, like Darcy mentioned, walking around kind of being quieter. You'll notice probably in Rome, not Rome especially, but Rome even, that things are a little bit quieter, just in general. You won't hear as many cars, you won't hear as many people shouting. It's just
a little more hushed.
A little bit more hushed, a little more low key. Anyway, that's not to really talk too much about the break period, but there is also, very quickly on that topic, even in Rome, Sundays are not everything's going to be open on a Sunday.
Right.
And some things that are open Sunday morning will not be open Sunday afternoon. Sometimes the grocery stores will be open Sunday morning and then they close at 12 or 12:30. So if you are coming and you're going to go and do anything, maybe try to look up the times before you get there. Or if you're going to be in Rome for a week or maybe 2 weeks, let's just say for a long vacation, just keep track of what's open on a Sunday and what's open and not open in the afternoon. Because if you need something for an emergency, like emergency food or medical supplies, like a lot of pharmacies are closed during lunch, so you won't be able to go to the pharmacy. So don't have an accident between 1:30 and 4:30 is really what we're getting at here.
No emergencies during lunchtime.
Yeah, no, never an emergency. But the second aperitivo hour, like you were just mentioning, is the one for dinner.
Yeah, so aperitivo in Italy is incredibly common, and often people will go out as a group before dinner or meet up with friends before dinner, and it's just a little drink. You'll have a beer, Campari soda, Aperol Spritz, whatever, little munchies, little snacks. Some places have, like a little mini dinner even that they give you. But usually it's little free snacks essentially that they give you with your drinks.
Yeah, it's kind of like bar snacks, but much nicer bar snacks.
Yeah.
So there is that basically that's that culture, and it lasts sometimes until like most places start around 6.
Yeah.
And then it'll last until dinner or even after dinner. Sometimes it kind of just blends together.
It does, yeah.
Especially certain neighborhoods in Rome. We live near the Ponte Milvio neighborhood, and that's one that there are a number of little places to get just a beer and a Campari soda, that kind of thing, and a number of places to get dinner. So it does kind of flow really easily from, let's have some drinks here, let's go over there, have some drinks and some food, and let's come back here to have a little after dinner digestif, or maybe a coffee or something like that. So some certain neighborhoods will be sort of packed from 6 to 12, 6 to midnight, basically.
Yeah, and dinner time is around 8:30. I think we talked about this before, but typically somewhere in there. And then after dinner, you'll have a digestivo if you want, a little like limoncello, a little amaro, for digestive reasons, of course, or a coffee, also for digestive reasons.
Sometimes both.
It
really depends. I mean, you can really get crazy with the amount of digestive aids they have here. But no, and a lot of people go to a different, restaurant after that, like to have something else, like just, not necessarily dessert, which, because even we've seen with gelato, like, and we'll again do a whole episode on gelato. But we've seen that more as like a midday snack more than like a dessert in the evening. Like even some of our favorite gelato places, it's that like, but before going back to work at like 4 in the afternoon, there's a line out the door of Italians who live there. And then sometimes in the evening, there's a couple people, but mostly it's like that, like, I want one walking back to work. I want a gelato.
Yeah.
So dessert here is a little bit less, at least, I mean, there's a lot of dessert options to clarify, but it might be something that you have at the restaurant.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the topic of aperitivo, cocktail culture is actually pretty big in Rome, which isn't really a thing in most of the other places that we've been. Up north, it's probably a little more popular because they're a little more globalized up there. But there are quite a few cocktail bars in Rome if that's something you're into. Some of them are pop-ups, like summer pop-ups. They'll have special ones like in Villa Borghese. They'll have like more of a, I don't know, garden vibe. But there are quite a few like that. They're kind of expensive. I mean, I know cocktails are in the US too, but you and I aren't really big on cocktails, so we don't usually go and spend $10 or $12 on a cocktail. But it seems super fun. So if that's something you're into, Rome is a good place for that.
Yeah, I mean, I think if it's also something you don't get at home, like we live in Italy, so I guess we definitely don't get it at home because we don't live in a place with a cocktail bar. But no, if you wherever you're from, if you don't get cocktails, if it's not a thing, it can be fun to definitely explore. But sometimes it almost, not like they're bad mixologists or anything like that, but it definitely feels like it's sort of in the very beginning stages. Sometimes it feels like it's like we've been to places that have just recently heard of a gin and tonic.
Yeah.
And it's, again, not bad. It's just like, oh, I thought everybody knew what a gin and tonic was.
Yeah, that's the thing. It's obviously different here in the South. If you ask for, I mean, like no one knows what a martini is for the most part.
Well, part of the reason though is that there's an alcohol here called martini, but it's
Right.
more of a vermouth than it is an actual martini.
Right. And some people will understand a gin and tonic, but there are people who are actual mixologists and really care about what they do. We were in Matera and there was a gin bar and it had the vibe of like a little hole in the wall, but the people who worked there really were passionate about what they did and they made great drinks. So it just depends on where you go. I would say don't have super high expectations, and you might be pleasantly surprised.
Yeah, and there are, thankfully, because it's Italy, it's still, it's always been, and it still is a pretty large importance is placed on local. So even things with gin, sometimes you'll find local gins, but if not, any of the ingredients tend to be local. Like even in Matera, it was a gin and tonic, or it's like a little twist of lemon. Of course, the lemon is Italian, and everything they try to make it as local as possible. Mm-hmm. And that's something obviously that everyone I think likes to see. Because I mean, maybe it's just me. I don't love the idea of going to a different country and having the same thing I had when I was back home.
Yeah,
I know
I agree with
that
that.
some people like that for consistency. They're like, I want to see the places, but I want to have consistent meals, so I will go to a chain. But especially if I'm getting a drink made, I want to feel like this drink can only be made, at this place.
It's something special.
Yeah. But actually, cocktail bars and drinking and all that does bring us to walking around with alcohol. Because we're from Savannah, where it's, I think, one of the two cities in America.
I think so.
Like
Two or
Savannah
three, maybe.
and New Orleans, I think. Maybe there's a third in there, where you're allowed to walk around with alcohol. Specifically in a Savannah, it's a very small set area of Savannah. It's, whatever it is, a quarter mile big. I mean, not that small. It's the downtown area.
Essentially, yeah.
And so you're allowed to walk around with alcohol, just having a beer or having a glass of wine or whatever it is. But here in Italy, pretty much everywhere, I don't know if there's specific places you're not allowed to, but you can walk and drink, or you can have a drink in public. And it's done. I mean, often everywhere. Like you will walk by parks, you will walk by the steps of a church, you will walk by a piazza, and you'll see people just having a beer together.
Sometimes places will have a no glass rule.
Yes.
That's pretty big because people misuse glass and will, shatter it and be obnoxious and possibly harmful. So just because you can walk around drinking doesn't always mean that you can carry a wine glass or a glass bottle around.
Yeah, and it's all, and I will, like, on that same sort of note, if you are, I know a lot of countries now in the EU, actually I was going to say Scotland, which is no longer in the EU, but when we were visiting Scotland, they were one of the, they were a country that also had these sort of like no alcohol sales past 10 in a grocery store. I think Perugia was around like 8. I think Rome was 8 or 7.
Rome, whenever we were there this last time, started at 8 and then suddenly switched to 6 p.m.
Right.
You couldn't buy alcohol in a grocery store. You could go to a bar and have a drink there, but you couldn't buy wine or beer in a grocery store past 8 or 6.
And we thought that was supposed to, like, Darcy and I were under the impression like, oh, it was maybe to kind of like prevent these grocery stores from competing with bars that had to recover because of COVID. But then we were reading that, like, no, it had more to do with curbing alcoholism. Like, if you can't go buy in large quantities from a grocery store, then you can't be an alcoholic.
I don't know if that's working, but they're trying.
They're trying. So that's just more of like a heads up. If you are going to be like, oh, I'm going to go out and I'm going to get all my groceries, I'm going to get some beer.
Or like if you're going to a party and you just want to pick up a bottle of wine, you need to plan for that.
Yes, absolutely. Got to plan ahead. Always plan ahead.
Remarkably, in a country that doesn't really do a lot of planning, you have to plan.
Yeah, right. No, it's kind of a pain. Like no one else there plans except you're gonna have to really. It has for us definitely not ruined an evening at all because it's like, oh, I can't get a bottle of wine. But it is just kind of annoying. It's just like, oh man, I really was hoping to get a beer tonight, and I don't really want to go out because sometimes it just it's the same thing here like as in every other country. There's markups on alcohol, and you're just like,
Yeah,
I don't want to pay €4 for a beer that costs 80 cents at the grocery store. Darcy had mentioned the glass in public, and I really want to add really quickly. I mentioned the Ponte Milvio neighborhood we stayed near, and where people had their drinks and stuff like that. But there's also a bridge, Ponte Milvio, Milvio Bridge, where a lot of people would, I don't know what they were doing, like Instagram, taking photos for Instagram.
Yeah.
I don't really know. It seemed like
if you Google Ponte Milvio, you'll just see a bunch of Instagram photos.
Yeah, or if like you look on Instagram, you'll see a bunch of photos of
Yeah.
people like. We couldn't figure out what it was because we'd see so many people like much younger than us. We're 26 and they were like 12 and 15, like dressed up to go to a club. And then we're like, where are they going? There's nowhere around. And then I think like once we went by late at night, and then once we just like we're like, oh, we'll post our own photos to Instagram about Ponte Milvio and see if they popped up when you type in Ponte Milvio. And we realized that, oh, this is just like a sort of an Instagram-y thing. But if you walk by, especially in the mornings after whatever it was like Thursday night. Was that?
Yeah, Thursday night is kind of the big. No, Wednesday.
Wednesday night.
I think it's Wednesday. Thursday is the big night in New York, I think.
Okay, because Wednesday it was so strange, but everywhere in Rome, it felt like Wednesday night was like the night to go out. Like things were dead practically Saturday, Sunday.
Yeah.
But like Wednesday night was just everything was slammed all the time. But we would go by the bridge, and it was just like, I mean, that night it'd be slammed with people.
Mm-hmm.
And then we go by in the morning and it's just like bottles of Prosecco and bottles of beer and bottles of this. And so they were all glass bottles. And of course, please don't knock them into the river.
Mm-hmm. And also don't follow out. Obviously, you guys, if you're listening to this, you're probably lovely people who always recycle and don't litter. A lot of Italians do litter. Italians, if you're listening to this, please don't litter. It's a big problem here. It really drives me nuts. So a lot of the people on Ponte Milvio, when they have like a little party out there, will just leave all of their trash and bottles, and it's really disgusting.
And there are, like when I was in Berlin, the argument for that is that there's a pretty, and I don't know if it's the same thing. This was in 2013, so it's almost 10 years ago.
Oh my gosh, wow, we're old.
So old. But I was told like, a lot of people leave glass bottles around when they've been drinking, because people who are homeless who come around and collect them and are able to exchange them for cash back.
Yeah, which is cool.
Yeah, so it's sort of like a way of like, basically leaving 10 cents in the ground or 15 cents in the ground. Especially, I mean, if you're drinking though a 6-pack, then you're leaving almost €1, I guess, depending how much they're worth in whatever cashback depository. Here, I don't know if it's the same thing. I don't think we've ever seen a glass for cashback thing.
Nope.
So I don't know.
We also we rarely see any regular person picking them up. There are people who it's their job to go and tidy up the bridge, or to just general lovely sanitation workers who help keep Italy clean.
Yeah, for real.
But we rarely see regular people picking them up.
Which is a shame, because it's like, I think part of it is just, it is, even with, I mean, I know because there's that argument, which is, I mean, not to get too personal, but the argument of like, well, if they didn't leave the bridge dirty, then the sanitation worker wouldn't have a job. They'd have a job. Rome is disgusting. They would have a job. But it's just, I think it also is because it is people leave it on the edge of the bridge where it does fall into the very wildlife active river below. It just, if you've ever looked at the Tiber, then you'll have seen like tons of trash in the water. And this ranges from everything from like scooters to just ovens to bottles to everything that people, and Darcy's mentioned there's a littering problem, and we've seen it, and it's hard to understand what it is, especially as people who kind of grew up with all these don't litter campaigns, like on TV and stuff like that, and litterbug and this and that. So it's weird to then be in a country where people do just like, I mean, the biggest one obviously is when they open up a pack of cigarettes, you take off the plastic and they throw the plastic on the ground. And it's just like, where do you think that's good? No one's coming, especially in southern Italy is really bad for this, because there are sanitation workers, but their job is just to go around and collect the trash, which everybody puts out every night. Their job is not to go around necessarily and sweep the streets. And if it is, it's not that often that they do it, just because it's only a couple of them. So anytime a rainstorm, all the trash collects, or it flows out into like the streams of the surrounding area. And a lot of the farms here end up being really trashed. So there's a kind of a culmination problem, and Rome again is no different. But it is if you are visiting, it would be absolutely stellar if you had a drink somewhere. If you took your bottle with you and found a glass recycling bin, which are everywhere. I want to clarify, it's not like these are hard to find.
Yeah.
Trash cans and recycling bins and things like that are very easy to find. But if you were to take your glass with you, that would be amazing. Or your bottles or your cans or whatever it is.
Just be respectful and kind.
Yeah.
I mean, we think you guys will be. We're not trying to lecture you, obviously, but it's just something that you and I have noticed and we're super passionate about and super conscientious of whenever we are going somewhere.
Yeah.
Or anywhere, literally.
Yeah. But
Living
it's also
here.
like trying not to make it worse for next person. It's like that whole like that I guess it's a hiker thing, or I don't know who's, but it's like leave it better than you found it kind of thing. And that's something we try to do, and it's difficult. I mean, obviously, but it is just that, if you're walking in a nature path and you see one bottle or two bottles, it's like, okay, we're going to pick them up and we're going to throw them away the next thing, just because it's the next person then doesn't actually have to see the bottles.
And nature doesn't have to deal with them itself.
Yeah, which is always a plus, always a positive.
Speaking of crimes, should we talk about drinking and driving here?
Yes, actually, I think we should.
So, obviously, don't drink and drive. Everybody knows that.
Throw that right at the beginning.
Yeah, just to preface
this is not going to be a how to drink and drive podcast. This is going to be a do not drink and drive podcast.
But just to warn you, the legal limit for driving under the influence of alcohol here is almost half of what it is in the U.S. So, like in the U.S., it's what, 0.08,
I think, is your blood
in many
alcohol level?
places.
Yeah.
And then here, in most places, the limit is 0.05. So, don't ever drink and drive. But here, even like one beer might mean that you're over the legal limit. And the carabinieri will do, they always do, random traffic stops. It doesn't mean, if you get stopped by the carabinieri, it doesn't mean that you're innately doing something wrong. They just often do random traffic stops. And if they ask you to do like a breathalyzer test, you cannot refuse. If you refuse that, they give you like the biggest sentence possible for drinking.
Yeah, they treat it like you are absolutely trashed.
Yeah. So just don't drink and drive.
They also might request, this is probably not necessarily for tourists, but they also can request that you do a blood test at a hospital, which means you have to go with them. Again, you cannot refuse that. I know a lot of people are like, oh, that's a police state. Not really. It's just, it is a pretty, so far, decently effective way of doing random stops just to keep people somewhat safe. Because I know that we have friends who are idiots who are like, oh, I can drive really well and I've been drinking. And I'm like, no, you cannot. No one can. And you shouldn't be either way. So it's that sort of thing of if you are, I mean, and we say this if you're renting a car or something. Like if you're going to rent a car, and I know so many people who are like, I'm going to rent a car and do a wine tour. And we're like, that sounds awesome. Just know that if you are above 0.05, then you absolutely can have your license revoked. And it's not like, just to clarify, I think some people are under this impression that I'm in a foreign country, they can't affect me. Like, oh, they definitely can. Oh, for sure, they can affect you. They can revoke your license. They can throw you in prison here. And then, America has to go through this whole process of extraditing you, which they might not bother if you're in jail for drinking and driving. They might just wait, ask you to wait your 6 months out in prison here.
And Rome is a pretty easy place to not drive if
Yes.
you've been drinking. You can go from bar to bar if you like, responsibly. Walking, taking public transportation, you don't need to drive. So don't worry about it.
Yeah, it's just more if you have come with a rental car, or if you're planning on renting a car, and really it was more of like if you're going to rent a car and do like a tour of vineyards around Rome, just to kind of, maybe the person driving it also should not be drinking.
Yes.
Because it's obviously also without having a breathalyzer with you or anything like that, without any way for you to test your own blood alcohol level. A lot of people in Italy, you might notice, will not drink if they've been driving. Or they might have a small beer. They'll be like...
They won't drink if they've been driving, or they won't drive if they've been drinking?
They won't drive if they've been drinking. They also might not drink if they've been driving. It depends on how long their day's been. But no, they won't drive if they've been drinking. And they might have a small beer or something like that. But ultimately, most people we've hung out with, if it's like, oh, we'll all go for drinks, it's the person who has been driving or who will be driving soon. It's like, no, I'll have a water. You guys have, have beers or wine or whatever it is. And there's always a designated driver, basically. It's kind of gotten a lot more, from what we've seen, it's gotten a lot more popular.
And more serious.
And a lot more serious. Yeah. It's not like no cowboy, no Western cowboy driving around, zooming through traffic stops here.
Oh my God. Should we end on something happier than people getting arrested for drinking and driving or littering, things like that?
Sure. So our last thing to end on that happy note that we're aiming for is to actually talk about the availability of water. Water, if you're from a place that does not pronounce your T's like D's, in Rome. This sounds like I'm going to say some super secret information about water in Rome. I'm not. I'm simply going. I think we mentioned already once in our first episode, maybe, or second episode of Walking Around. But there are water fountains everywhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Free water, public water use water fountains.
Yeah, they're like these green cast iron, constantly flowing water. They basically they're. I mean, almost every fountain in Rome is potable.
Yeah.
Maybe not the famous ones.
Yeah, don't drink from famous pretty water fountains like the Trevi fountain. Water's not potable, but usually the fountains will say non-potable. Yeah,
or non potabile.
Yeah.
But there's always like you might like on a street corners or this and that, you might find these like weird, beautiful little sculpted fountains, and typically those are potable
unless they say otherwise. Yeah,
unless they say otherwise. You can if it has a spout that is a metal spout that is kind of jutting out from the wall and curves down in a way that you might cup your hands underneath it or fill up a water bottle underneath it. That's a pretty safe bet. Because
and usually other people will be using them, so you can judge by what other people are doing.
Yeah, and it's good. I mean, it's fresh, clean, absolutely amazing water, especially in the summer where it gets really hot in Rome and it's really humid. Where we come from, a humid place, so it's not that. We're used to it basically.
Yeah.
But it can still be very humid, and then having these free water fountains is just a godsend.
There's one Frizzante water place, the little bubbly water by the Colosseum. It's always packed with tourists, but it's great because you can get a free liter of bubbly water.
Yeah.
I mean, they only cost like 45 cents from the store in a plastic
water
bottle.
But and that's free. What matters.
And it's so fun.
I will say, yeah, just as if you're around around the Colosseum, there's that whole area. I can't remember the name of the area specific, but that whole like general part of town where it's basically you might walk around for a couple hours because all the sort of famous things are there. You will probably see a lot of people selling water bottles. But there are just as many free fountains around. So if you have your own water bottle, which is a huge recommendation, by the way, Hydro Homies for life over here. But bring your reusable water bottle, or as we do, we forget a reusable water bottle and we go to the store and we buy a plastic water bottle and then we just keep reusing that one.
We don't recommend that. That's probably BPA and all those terrible things in it for you.
Microplastics, it's terrible. Actually, you know what? If you have forgotten yours and you are anywhere near a Decathlon, that's a pretty good place to get a $1, $2 water bottle that's like metal and aluminum. They sell really nice, cheap water bottles.
And something else we did in Rome, we were there for the summer, so it was incredibly hot. We both wore... Okay, we looked a little dorky, but whatever. We both wore water-safe sandals.
Tevas, to be specific.
Yeah.
And if you'd like to sponsor us, please get in contact.
But you can just stick your feet under the fountain, and it's so nice. I had a little handkerchief that I would put under the water and put on my neck. Oh, my goodness, it was so nice. So really avail yourself of these fountains if you want to. They're awesome.
Yeah, definitely don't underestimate the benefits of cold water on hot feet or on the back of your neck. It really...
And stay hydrated, obviously. Yeah. Oof, man, it is sometimes a hard thing to do, even just hanging around the house, but really important when you're traveling.
Well, actually, if I may, especially in Trastevere, which is a lot of people recommend, go to Trastevere, this and that, has a great pasta, has this, has that. No trees. I don't think they've ever heard of a tree.
Nope.
So it's just basically stone walls and stone ground. And the reason I mention that is because we would always go to the Porto Portesi market on Sundays. We'll talk about that in our market episode. I'm trying to get people really excited to come back for that market episode because I'm really excited about it. But we would go to the Porto Portesi market, we buy stuff, and then we go have a little lunch at like Danina's or something like that. And that's in Trastevere. So we'd have to kind of go through Trastevere. And in the first couple of times, we did not bring water.
Oof, that was a mistake.
Really, yeah, it's not even that long of a walk, but it's a brutally hot oven. And then, unfortunately, you get there, and some of the tables are in the under the umbrellas, and some are not. But that's the other thing in Trastevere is some of these tables are not under umbrellas, and that's just extra brutal because there's one place I think like I can't remember the name of it, but it's a really famous pasta place. And if you ever look at like best cacio pepe in Rome, this is like usually in the top 3. And they have a couple tables outside. And they were obviously popular during COVID because that's the only place you could sit. But depending on where the sun was, you might not be protected by the little umbrella is there.
Yeah.
But they still had to sit you, and if you didn't want to sit, then you lost your space in line. So people would just sit boiling, baking, roasting in the sun, and it just looked miserable. So heat stroke is very easy to get. We've noticed in Rome. It is not something to play with. So yeah, definitely stay hydrated as much as you can.
Stay hydrated, stay in the shade if you need to.
Get some electrolytes in you, eat some salt. I don't know, get some little electrolyte like packets, because that's a lot of people were telling us. We're like, oh, you got to get these electrolyte packets. That's what you use.
Decathlon also has those.
We really should get sponsored by Decathlon. That'd be sweet too.
They're pretty cool. They're pretty responsible business practice, as far as I know.
But I think that's everything.
Yeah, I think that's it.
Yeah.
Cafe, drinks, coffee,
drinking,
water.
Driving, water.
Yeah.
So that is, I think, everything on our drinking and drinks in Rome. Not necessarily drinking in Rome, but drinking and coffee in Rome. And we really do hope that you do at least once go get a coffee and sort of just, we assume you will, but I know some people do kind of go to Starbucks, which there is a Starbucks there, a couple of them.
It's a Starbucks in Rome.
I'm fairly certain we've seen one, right?
Probably is. There's a McDonald's.
Yeah, maybe not. I thought there was a Starbucks in Rome. I don't want to get anybody's hopes up. But we do know people that do like, I can't live without my American coffee in the morning. If that's you, totally fine. But we do hope that you try to enjoy the coffee culture that already exists in Rome.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. And thank you, Darcy, for being here.
Thank you, Nathaniel, for being here.
This was awesome. And we hope you guys will come to our next episode, which we believe will be on gelato.
Yeah, I think so.
That seems like a natural progression from
You've been really excited about the gelato
food
episode.
and restaurants and drinks to gelato.
Yeah. And if you want to find either of us on Twitter, I'm at not Mr. Darcy.
And I am at Melor Nathaniel. I think not Mr. Darcy, by the way, has underscores.
It does. Sorry, not underscore. Mr. underscore Darcy.
Sounds like a little captcha there. Mine has no underscores. I was able to snag a name that was underscore free. But if you have any questions, or if you would like to hear anything specific, or if we mention something that is deeply wrong.
Yeah. Oh, goodness. Please let us know if we mentioned anything wrong.
And we'd love to amend it in our next podcast and give you credit for it. With that being said, though, thank you guys so much for listening, and we hope to see you on the next podcast.